Okay, I think we're live. Or are we? Yes, we are. We are now live. There's sort of a few moments there before the light comes on, and then you know your lights, camera, action. Okay, this is just to answer a few questions or just a few discussions based on questions I had from my subscribers. So, let's see, where should we start? Well, one of the things I thought is, you know how there's two things that we say, because we often talk about Brexit on this, obviously, and they say that, oh, the EU is so fantastic because it's prevented war. Well, the last major war wasn't that long ago. It was only 70 odd years, which is like the blink of an eye in human history. I think it's rather presumptuous. I think they should be touching wood or something, because it wasn't that long ago. It could happen at any time. There's certainly been enough wars. There's been the problems in Ukraine, war with Kosovo, the breakup of Yugoslavia, all that, which I think was manipulated by the EU because Tito had the biggest army and they needed to break that down, the EU. But what about Sarkozy and Cameron causing problems in Libya? I won't include Obama there because he's not in the EU. But there's been enough other wars going on the periphery, so I don't think they can lay claim to saying that that's a great thing for stopping war. The other thing they always say is that the Brexiteers are kind of living in the past, and they are the way, the EU and the whole thinking behind the EU is the future. Well, the EU, when was the Treaty of Rome? Like 1960? And we joined 1973 when was the referendum and whatever. I mean, 1973 is not exactly modern, hey? It's like saying the Carpenters is the future of music. That's about as sensible as it is to say being in the EU is the future. Not that I don't like the Carpenters, because rainy days in Brussels always get me down. Yeah, so I just wanted to get that off my chest about Brexit, because I'm tired of those hackneyed old arguments that you hear all the time. It's like, yawn, think of something else, because those really, if that's the best you've got to endorse this ridiculous plutocracy, which is currently collapsing under the weight of its own illegitimacy, then I'm afraid that's crazy. Okay, one of you guys mentioned to me some other person on YouTube who does videos, and he's called the Time Traveler. I don't usually watch the other astrologers or psychics on here, but that was mentioned to me, so I had a small look to see, and I saw some of his predictions from last year, and he was talking about things like North Korea and World War III being struck off by North Korea and all that sort of thing. I thought his predictions really had the air of MSM about them. It was very mainstream media. If you've got a journalist from, say, Sky News to draw up some predictions, it would have been very similar, because it was all based on the narratives that you see in the mainstream. I mean, if he listened to David Icke or Alex Jones, he'd probably come up with something quite different, wouldn't he? It might be a little bit more creative. So from that point of view, I thought, well, it's a little bit pedestrian. There's nothing there that's really a surprise. Because if you think about it, go back to our grandparents or great-grandparents, they might have been able to predict air travel if they just thought ahead and used their imagination. They probably would never, ever have predicted the internet, would they? So talking of time travel, it reminded me of something interesting that I'd like to maybe mention to you. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard about Al Bielek. He was part of the Philadelphia Project. In fact, him and his brother Cameron, they both did maths. I think his brother Cameron did maths at the University of Edinburgh, even though he was an American. And Al did maths at, I think it was Yale or Harvard. And they were in the Navy in 1943. They were based at Pearl Harbor. They got a call out and they were sent over to Washington, I think to Norfolk in America, just the night before Pearl Harbor happened. And they began to do the, because they was, mathematicians, they began to do the calculations for the Philadelphia Project. They worked with John von Neumann, Tesla, and Einstein on that project, although von Neumann was the engineer and the kind of mathematician, the scientist. So he was the one who brought everything together. And I think Tesla pulled out at some stage in this project because he didn't like the direction. So what was interesting to me, because there was on the internet, I'm not sure if it's still there, about 8 hours of Al Bielek telling his story of the Philadelphia Project. Now, yeah, these things can be fake, and the guy could have been making the whole thing up. But his level of technical knowledge and the way he described the exact way they built the USS Eldridge, well, they didn't build the whole ship. They reworked it, remodeled it with all the coils, all the electronics to do the experiment. It was quite involved. It was quite detailed. This guy must have known something. But what he talked about, because he was involved in the project, first when they did it up in, I think they did it on Long Island, where they actually had the cables running from land to the ship, and then they did it again in Norfolk in the harbour there, where they had all the electronics on the ship, and they did it twice. once was a semi-success. The next time it disappeared, and as if you've heard the story about the USS Eldridge, it was kind of disappeared for a few minutes and arrived 7 miles away when it reappeared. He said he was actually on the ship, and as a result of being on the ship, he traveled. He like slipped through a wormhole, I guess you could say, and time traveled to 2137. So I only mention this because of time traveling, what he said about 2037. And he said that the world, in terms of the geography, looked very different to now because most of what we know is Europe and America is covered in water. So there was far less landmass. The population was far smaller. He mentioned floating cities. So people were living in cities that were kind of, they're kind of floating around, right? So that seems quite, it could be. I'm not saying that this guy is 100% legit. I'm just thinking in terms of time travelers making predictions. His predictions seemed a little bit more out there and possible, quite interesting. He also said that at that stage there was a one world government, but it was an AI government. So it was a computer, a self-programming computer, didn't require the input of humans to maintain it or program it. And that was what was forming a worldwide government. Well, how well it was working, I don't know, but with a much lower population, maybe. So I just found that quite interesting in terms of his predictions for that particular time. So anyway, as I said, I'm going to try and look at the charts of as many countries as I can to get a flavor and see what we can project, what we can look at. Any other questions you have? Like I said, if you're in Ireland, I've listened to Gemma Doherty's her broadcasts, and it seems that in the Irish are also waking up to this, what I would call the Saturn-Pluto conjunction phenomenon, where there's kind of a pushback against communism stroke globalism, which has been the trend. Okay, well, that's kind of questions that I thought I'd answer for now. And see you guys all soon. Again, thank you for the wonderful comments. Thank you for the support. Love doing this. And take care, everyone.